I want to welcome everybody to our meeting today, your Humanists of Greater Portland Sunday meeting. And let's get started. You're here at a humanist meeting, and humanism is a philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead meaningful and ethical lives and use reason and empathy to guide their decisions and actions. We do this because this is the only life of which we are certain. As humanists, we affirm the dignity and worth of all people. We do this not only to acknowledge all that humans have accomplished in the arts and science and humanities, but also simply for the possibility of peace and well-being when people interact with respect for one another. Our topic today, Braver Angels, incorporates the humanist commitments of ethical development, humility, and most definitively empathy, which is defined in the 10 Commitments as the ability of stepping outside of one's own perspective to consider someone else's thoughts, feelings, or circumstances. Empathy promotes tolerance, consideration, and compassion among us all.
My friend Grace Dunsmore just gave me this last night to say, hey, do you want to read this at the Humanists? It's just a short thing. So, yeah. And it's pretty political. But anyway, over the past 2 decades, feckless war making, a financial crisis, and institutional rot have let loose a ferocity in America's politics that has given presidential contests seemingly existential stakes. As Donald Trump and Joe Biden campaign against a global backdrop of rising authoritarianism, this week's cover, which is from The Economist, asks whether Americans are right to fear for their democracy. It is a subject that we approached with some trepidation. When thinking through what a second Trump term would bring, it is hard to avoid veering into either complacency or hysteria. If Americans believe that their Constitution alone can safeguard the Republic from a Caesar on the Potomac, then they are too sanguine. Sanguine?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Preserving democracy depends today, as it always has, on the courage and convictions of countless people all across America, especially those charged with writing and upholding its laws. And yet, alarmism is dangerous too, because national emergencies, real or confected, are the strong man's ally. We always try to be sober and level-headed. This is The Economist. Yes. This week, that mattered more than ever.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you so much for having that in your pocket. Very timely. Thank you.
Yeah, really.
Okay, now I'm going to, in just a moment, going to introduce Michael Balter, who's our speaker today. He's going to be speaking about an organization that's very dear to me, and that is Braver Angels. The HGP Building Trust Group that's been meeting for a couple years now. And it's a group that is progressives or liberal philosophy and conservative philosophy. And we try to get an equal number, although we find that we can get a lot more liberals showing up than conservatives. But we finally got the group of conservatives coming. And we've been using the Braver Angels philosophy of listening to gain understanding at our meetings. And so Michael is the spokesman for Braver Angels, which is a national group, and he'll be explaining a little bit more about that. And Michael's had over 45 years of experience in planning, policy development, and fundraising. Before his retirement, he served as CEO of Boys and Girls Aid Society and is currently an adjunct professor at PSU. Michael, we're going to work together. It's going to be kind of an interaction, and I'm going to hand it over to you, but know I'm here and we're together. Okay. All right. Yeah. Welcome. So glad you're here with us today.
So first, I want to apologize for disrupting your orderly way of doing things. I would encourage as many of you to come and join the circle here, because a big part of Braver Angels is not just intellectual, but it's experiential. because the polarization we're facing now, I think that was a perfect reading for today. The polarization we're facing now is not only intellectual, it's not about ideas, but it's become emotional. It's affective polarization, where we begin to demonize and make the enemy of the other. It's not just a disagreement of policy or ideas. So this is a threat, because this has happened. Any of you that grew up when I grew up, I'm 76. You know, we were trained to hate the Japs and the Germans, right? We played war games about the Japs and the Germans because we were trained that way. It wasn't an accident. At 8 years old, I didn't know the difference of these people, but I was trained to think about them in a particular way. I think we're at the risk of the same way of being trained to think about the other, whoever they are, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, liberals, conservatives, the other divisions we have, racists, whatever the alternative to racist is, not racist. But I mean, these divisions are powerful, and I think they're tearing us apart. So I have a couple slides that I'll show at the end. Again, it'll be more of an experiential thing. I'd rather have this be a conversation rather than a presentation. Okay. So what we've done is got these handouts, and my goal is that this is a technique I've used a lot. We're just going to ask people to read paragraphs from these pages. And then we'll stop for a second after a person reads it, and we'll reflect. Now, the challenge we have here is that because we have Zoom people with us, we're only going to be able to go in at a time. So if we read and then someone has a reflection, just raise your hand, we'll recognize you. And we'll just go through these 2 pages, and then we'll pause for a while. And because I've got one that's called, let's see, they changed the printing on this one. It's just, it doesn't really have a title. It's that one. It's Braver Angels, and it says Braver Angel Workshops, but, and then the other one is Rules of Engagement. So there, you should have 2 handouts. I've also got some pencils and notepads, little note cards in case you want to take notes. Because in the slideshow, we'll actually be talking about how we feel. So you might want to reflect on your feelings. And there won't be any, you won't have to share unless you want to. So this isn't like true confessions. I should say the other thing is, this isn't a reading class. So if I ask you to read and you don't want to read, you just say pass and we'll go to the next person. The goal here isn't that. The other thing I want to make sure that there's time for, because a reasonable question would be, well, Mike, how has Braver Angels participation changed your life? Right. So I'm willing to answer those kind of questions when we get to the question and answer period. Because obviously my job here is to recruit you to be interested in Braver Angels, in their methodology and their approach, to consider taking a workshop, because there's, I think you'll see there's 2 things here. One is training and skill acquisition. Have we forgotten how to listen to one another? Right. So is that a skill we need to regain? Have we forgotten how to listen to someone when you're emotional, when we get upset? Okay. So is that a skill we have to learn? Have we forgotten how to listen to someone we don't like or we disagree with? So there's workshops about that. Then there's experiential workshops where you actually are talking with someone that is different than you. You do some training together, then you share something around a hot topic like gun control or abortion, race relations, in a one-on-one conversation. And then you get to evaluate, how did you do? All right. So let's start with asking someone to read. We're going to start with this first page. And on the old, the old way they did this, they had who we are, but they don't have it. So I'm going to read this one sentence that I love that is not on your sheet. So I'm going to read it. And if you are heartsick, oh, thank you. This is great. We're going to use the other sheet first, though, Dave. The other one. It says a 1-page description, I think. It says, if you are heartsick about the rancor tearing us apart, if you believe that your opponents should not be your enemies, If you believe that America's best days are ahead of her, you need braver angels and we need you. So now your top sheet, there was someone that's been smiling at me most of the meeting. I'm wondering if you just read that first paragraph.
Braver Angels brings Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. Our activities include organizing community workshops, debates, and local alliances, gathering annually to determine national priorities, and convening red, blue, and other thought leaders to make new arguments and show better ways to disagree.
So any reflections? Okay, so I don't think there's an alliance in Portland yet, but like in Clackamas County, there's 5 of us that are forming an alliance. And as Helen said, what we're short of right now is conservatives. So we've been going to the Republican Party and talking with them and some church groups. And we've actually recruited 2 new conservatives. But to form an alliance, you have to have a balance. You have to have conservatives and liberals in balance, or you can't call yourself an alliance. Now, there is an alliance in Washington and Yamhill County. It's called the Northwest Willamette Valley, and I've got one of their handouts. So before we end, but that's how we organize locally. Now, also, obviously, anyone can use these principles. You don't have to attend a workshop. Much of the things you can gain online. They have these workshops on Zoom all the time. So I don't know if that answered your question.
And there is local workshops. There's the organization of Braver Angels has workshops in libraries, and
Right.
they're wonderful.
Yeah, there is a branch in Roseburg. In fact, one of the state leaders is from Grants Pass, I believe. So, and I know that there's people in Beaverton that are organizing. I think the Washington County group is organized there. And you had a question? Yes. Would you read the next one?
At every level of leadership, from the national level to local alliances, we have an equal number of reds and blues. We welcome those who lean neither red or blue to join us in our work. Our leaders and members range from working class to affluent and come from many backgrounds as we strive to reflect the country we seek to serve.
Any reflections on that? This is a really hard and fast rule. Like, we are desperate to form an alliance that we can't until we have a balance of conservatives. Otherwise, if you gather a bunch of liberals together, they're going to look at these things and say, this is great. And we talk to each other. So we haven't really challenged each other, right?
Coming up with the reds and the others, because I understand he red, blue, and others.
Mhm.
So you've got to have like the libertarians and things like that in that group. And I like what it's saying. That's all.
We'll get to the recruitment. Don't worry. So could you read the next one? Next paragraph? We'll just go down the row here and make it not complicated.
We're a dues-paying membership organization led by a small staff and many volunteers. We include our entire membership in regular video conferences and delegates attending an annual convention to help guide the organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit led by a board of directors. All donations are tax deductible.
Then we invite you to join today. So I can see you can see this is a pretty standard nonprofit organization. The challenge is that there are very few paid staff. In other words, all the people participating in Oregon are volunteers. From the state level to the regional level to the county level, there are no paid staff at the local level. It's all grassroots volunteers, which makes it very difficult. One of the things I appreciated the most about Bravery Angels as I began to explore it was, in some ways, they're very rigid about their branding. So I have to use some of their materials. I can't just wing it, because if I'm representing Bravery Angels, they have a certain standard, like this balance of red and blue, like these rules of engagement that we'll do next. You have to be trained moderator to run a workshop, okay? Because things can get pretty diffuse and watered down if there isn't some discipline. The other thing Braver Angels does organizationally is they evaluate every session. So when we get to the PowerPoint, it's unusual for, I think, a nonprofit, which I've managed a number of, to hold itself so accountable to its membership. So every workshop, there's an evaluation of, has your attitude changed? Have you shifted? Did what we present affect you, not just intellectually, but emotionally? Because that's what we're trying to do, is change people's perspective about people. We're not trying to change opinions. Okay. Rules of engagement, next sheet. It started in, I believe, North Carolina, 2016. And there were 3 people who were close friends, one very conservative, one very liberal, and then a person who was what they would call purple. And that's what I consider myself. I have both conservative and liberal opinions. And they were distressed about the animosity after Trump's election and the vitriol. And so they said, we got to do something. So they decided to invite, and we'll get to that. I'm glad you asked this question again on the slide. So we have a picture of the group. They invited 11 conservatives and 11 liberals together, and they spent a weekend together. And one of the founders is a marriage counselor. So he used the techniques that came when people came for a divorce, where they couldn't stand being in the same room together, where they couldn't talk to one another. He used these same techniques about reflecting on the other person, reflecting on what they said that's correct. What part did you play in this animosity? So they did that with groups. So they had the liberals go and be together, and they talked among themselves about, what did we contribute to this animosity? What are these accusations that are made about us true? And then same thing with the Reds. They did the same thing. Then what was it? What are the things that the other side is saying is also true, that you believe is correct? So, and then they came together and shared those things, where all the Reds talked about the blues, about the good things they did, and also what they owned that was destructive, and then they reversed. Then they did one-on-one sessions. So this is how that started, and it was just these 3 guys and these 25 people on a weekend. They said this will work.
Yeah.
And so they just started running workshops. And then now you'll see, I'm not going to go through, we'll do this on this next, you can see I'm skipping all the things that we do. So you can look at those, but now they're doing debates, and I'll share, there's going to be one on Zoom run by the Northwest Willamette Valley chapter on the Oregon urban-rural divide.
Uh-huh.
And they're going to have a debate on it, and it's going to be on video. So I'll leave that announcement out. But it's that type of thing where that you look at actual difficult questions in your location. You can hit, and the debates there are very different. Graver Angels debate is much, there's not a winner loser. It's about presenting ideas in an orderly way. And you can, again, you can go, and the nice thing about Braver Angels, you can go to the website, you can want to know about debates, click on debates, and you can watch videos of debates, recorded videos. So don't know if that answered your question. I probably went on and on, but yeah. 2016, after the Trump election and that the vitriol that was around that, the divisiveness that occurred. So, and now, and I'll have statistics. Statistics are kind of dry, but I have a sheet that has that. So, well, how many Braver Angels are there, where are they located, and all that. So I have that for you. Yeah, I don't know about how widespread. I think most states have some Braver Angels. There's, I think, 54,000 people who have participated. There's 12,000 paying members. So I think there's 200 and some state coordinators. So, but I have that sheet for you before we leave.
I've been attending the debates, the national debates, and it's been on abortion. They've had they've been really good, but over 100 people are attending those from all over the country. Those are Zoom, and they're really fun.
Yeah, and they're managed really well, and yet they're passionate. Yeah. So you don't lose the people's passion. I think the other thing that he has ones on race. He has ones race policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the last one, was on race.
Yeah.
Is that on YouTube?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and and all that stuff's really well done.
Yeah, they're about 2 hours long and they run them like the chair just like an iron fist. They don't mess around.
Well, and they have limits of how long the presentations, and you have to address the chair. You don't get to address the speaker.
Yeah.
So there's no confrontational, what did you mean by this? You have to ask the chairperson, I'd like to ask the speaker this question. It's, it's almost English and it's,
Yeah, very, very proper.
so we're going to rules of engagement.
Yeah, the first page, there's the different programs they have, and there's 6 that they've listed there.
Yeah, and I'll go through some of those later. I think I want to get through some of this so you get a better sense of, we've kind of talked about the organization. Now we're going to talk about the rules of engagement, which I think are really important. Because these are the ones that anybody that participates in Braver Angels basically has to adopt to some level, or you're just not going to fit in. They're going to ask you to be quiet. So I'm going to read the first one. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. And then I'm going to do the next one, which is the following is intended for a general overview of Braver Angels principles and practices. It is not intended to replace the skills someone can learn at a Braver Angels workshop. More information about Braver Angels workshops can be found on the flip side of this page, which again is a listing of the kind of offerings that we have. Braver Angels is very kind of rigid, I guess I would say. It's the same reason I wanted to have this kind of a discussion rather than me presenting to you, is that so much of Braver Angels is experiential. It's being with other people. It's not being in your head all the time. You have to be thinking, but you also then have to be at some level an empathetic or emotional level of, dealing with this stuff. Okay, so who on this side would like to read? Because I already wiped out these guys. Would you like to read as individuals? And I'm
As
just
an
gonna-
individual, we try to understand the other side's point of view, even if we don't agree with it.
Just go ahead and do that whole section.
Listening without thinking about your points. After the other person has shared their thoughts, summarize what they said. Check for understanding before responding. Next point, be humble and vulnerable. Next, ask only questions that help you better understand the other person's position. Next, refrain from asking gotcha questions. That's no fun. Consider or even ask the other person, what life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and the public good?
So reflections. Is it things we naturally do? Did you see yourself in any of these don't do it? Yeah. Okay, would you read next? Miss? Okay, sir, would you be willing to read the next one?
In our communities, we engage those who disagree with, looking for common ground and ways to work together. Agree on ground rules before challenging discussion. Use I statements, for example, I am having trouble understanding the thought process, rather than you thought process is wrong. Speak for yourself, not for your side. Share points, excuse me, share points from someone on the other side who made valid points. Share valid criticism on your own side. If the other person says something offensive to you, re-engage respectfully and or ignore it and move on. Stick to the facts and avoid exaggeration. Avoid sarcasm.
So any reflections on these statements? Anybody back here too?
I have a
Sure.
reflection, especially on the one about something that is offensive to you. That's tough. I mean, how do you respectfully say that without elevating the situation?
So what we know is that if someone is attacking you and what you believe, Your natural response is to defend yourself. An unnatural response is to say, oh, it looks like we disagree. Rather than coming up with the other answer or try to refute or debate, you're not going to get any place with this person. If they've already decided that their technique is to humiliate you or to confront you or embarrass you, you don't want to engage with that person. So the simplest thing is to say, oh, it looks like we disagree. How's the weather? I'm serious. You know, this is one where there's one of the trainings where it talks about depolarization within. You learn techniques about how to deflect those hot situations because they go nowhere. You'll just beat each other emotionally to death and you both go away bloodied. You know, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth means we're all blind and toothless, right? So, I mean, I think there is a practical part about all this, but it is training. You have to have someone confronting you and you then, you know, that's why the experiential part is good. We are probably generally kind, loving people who are conflict averse. If we're going to engage with people who are different than us, you have to have the risk of conflict. And oftentimes in conflict is where an intention is where the new opportunities occur. As long as we avoid one another, we're just going to be tribal. And there will be no common ground. If we do these exercises, we're going to find there's things we do agree on, you know, on issues of abortion or in immigration, these things, there is common ground. There has always been common ground, right? We have now become polarized where we don't see the common ground anymore. But you have to be willing to be in that tense, where do we find it? How do we find it? If we're always avoiding that tension, you know, there's an old story that the engineers were worried about the friction between the steel wheel and the steel rail. So they kept finding ways to reduce that friction. At a certain point, they reduced it so well that it just spun. Because the friction is the tension that moves a locomotive forward, right? So we can't be afraid of some of that tension. Yelling at one another doesn't get any place. Humiliating someone else doesn't get any place. But this mild tension of saying, I don't understand. Why do you feel this way? This notion of asking for, could you tell me why you feel so strongly about this? And oftentimes there's a very personal, deeply held experience that shapes that position. And you can empathize with that person's experience, not with their point, not with their policy statement, but you can empathize with them why they chose, why they got to that position, right? So now you've changed your attitude about the person, not about the policy. And in that shared empathy, there's opportunity for a new intellectual insight, right? Because you're now in this, you're equals, you're empathetic with one another, right? And they'll probably turn to you and say, well, why do you have your feeling so strongly? And you'll share something personal about you. And in that opportunity, you have the place to find common ground. That's at least the approach of Braver Angels, the notion about how this works.
Thank you, Mike.
That makes sense? Okay, so we're to the last one. This fine lady is going to do this for me.
In politics, we support principles that bring us together rather than divide us. Avoid name calling and labeling. For instance, wingnuts, Bible thumper, libtards, snowflakes. Look at how you and your side may have contributed to the problem. Avoid characterizing others' beliefs. Realize it's okay to have strong opinions as long as we express them respectfully. Criticize the policy, not the side. Avoid they all or you all. It's a classic sign of stereotyping.
So could people relate to these statements too? I mean, you know, one of the challenges is that once these labels get a roll on and they appear to be cute, you know, or funny, they're not, right? They're really destructive. They're pejorative. they're demeaning. And that's the point of them. But if we keep repeating them, then we're participating in that polarization, right? Yes, sir.
What's a wingnut?
Well, I would think that many conservatives, at least the ones I've met, think that many liberals are around the bend, particularly on some of the issues of, well, you can't say that, that's going to be triggering, right? Or that's emotionally upsetting, or, this person's going to be offended by that. I think there's this point where people say you're basically crazy. You've gone so to the extreme of being polite or courteous or thoughtful that you're not getting anything done. You're spending all your time being sensitive and not accomplishing anything. Oftentimes, the conservatives we've worked with have said, where's the action? All this great workshop and training and how to talk to one another and you're dancing around. Where do we get something done? Okay. So I think there's this balance between how sensitive and how thoughtful and how arranged and controlled, because we're trying to manage that conflict and tension, and how much do we just sit with one another and have some basic rules, but not be so bound by the rules that we can't experience any tension. So now, Jeff, should we ask if there's any comments from our Zoom members? Because we're going to move on from here now. So
I think, let me see, I've just got something on the chat.
we're going to
This is a comment on chat. As a communication expert, I think it's important to remember that these rules of engagement, whether this type of debate or in a dialogue session, that we fall in and out of rules. It's understanding that we cannot adhere to best practice 100% of the time. I'm not sure who that was from, but thank you. That was a good point. Anything about that, Mike, to comment?
I think it's the same thing with the workshops and the experience is probably more important than some of the trainings, because you get to practice this behavior. The rules, I think, can for some people be a barrier. On the other hand, they're a protection, right? There's some common rules. So if someone suddenly starts yelling at you, you say, well, wait a minute. I thought Braver Angels had a basic standard that we don't yell at one another. We can be emotional, we can be passionate, but we don't call each other names, and we don't physically assault one another.
No. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
Where some places, some places, this notion of being aggressive is part of their methodology, right?
I went to one of the trainings and spent a day there, Mike, and learned all these wonderful rules. And I made friends with this young man, not friends, but we were sitting next to each other. And we were getting along, everything was going, we had a great day. And then it ended. And I don't know how, slavery had been discussed in the meeting. And he made a comment
I'm ready for this.
about that slavery really wasn't that bad, and that in our country we had the best treatment of slaves. And he went on, and I'm like, I wanted to deck him. I did. It took everything in my power. I mean, Al was like, Helen, it's time to go home, because it was. And I wasn't going to change his mind, but I really thought, where did you get this information? But we left. I mean, we weren't behaving ourselves, because here all day long, we've been learning these things, and I just lost it.
Well, an anecdote is that I had a close friend who was on my board of directors and talked about the Billy Graham effect, where you're in the stadium, you're hearing Dr. Graham, and he's got you filled with the spirit and all this. You get in the parking lot and you're cursing at the guy who's cutting you off, trying out of the parking lot. He said, yeah, it lasts about till you walk into your car, So I think this is the challenge with trainings, and on rules. So I think, but if you find that you have relationships with people who are very different than you, you remember that person. And I'll share a personal story when we get to that time. We're going to do some slides now.
There's Todd has a question. Todd, come on in.
Oh,
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Mike, for an excellent presentation. I've been fortunate this weekend to hear your organization twice, because Jeff Spitzer at a Toastmasters conference I was at gave a presentation as well. So I really believe in what your organization does in certain ways, but I have an alternative viewpoint or an alternative question. I want to see what you think. So I feel like it's so important for society right now for things to change on Trump, abortion, and guns that I would rather spend time with my people, mobilizing them and trying to outvote the other side. And I find I want to treat people with respect, but I don't find conversations with the other side particularly enjoyable. So I just avoid them and try and mobilize my side for the betterment of society. How do you look at that viewpoint?
How's that working for you?
I don't know. We'll find out in November.
Well, look, I think that has been the strategy,
Right.
particularly since 2016. We have a 1 vote difference in the Senate, and now we have a 1 vote majority in the House, and we have 2 centenarians. I mean, my God, can't we do better than a 77-year-old and an 81? Are there any 45-year-old or 50 or 60-year-old people in this country that can run the country? No, because we're tribal and we're holding on to our old leaders, hoping that they'll beat the hell out of the other person. It's not working. So Todd, good luck. But I mean, I can tell you that Clackamas County was at one point blue. It is now at best purple, but it's turning red. So, and that is the Republican Party. I went to their central committee meeting because I have to meet some, conservatives, and their strategy is fight, fight, fight. Do not compromise. We are losing every time we compromise. We lose. We have to beat them and take control. So that's it. We'll just bloody each other. That's why I'm doing this, because.
Right. But I think where we can agree is maybe in time we can change the system with these approaches, but right now it's not going to change. One side's going to win, one side's going to lose in terms of right now between now and November. So, this can be a long-term strategy.
I'm sorry, I'm going to make, this is a terrible comment, but I guess you guys have loosened me up. What's the day after look like? I mean, isn't this a conversation in Gaza?
January 6th.
I mean, what is going to happen next? Even if our side wins, half of the country will be upset and angry.
Whoever.
And at this point, possibly violent from both sides. And the progressives are no different. I'm sorry, but this notion of permission to have violence when you disagree with someone is on the table for both sides. So Todd, I think we all have to vote, and we have to vote with the that we think are most effective. But I think the strategy has played itself out. I think that's where we are today, where the margins are so tight and the passion is so high that I don't know, whoever wins isn't going to win. The country will probably be very difficult to govern, regardless, because the houses will be so tightly, in conflict. I mean, the founding fathers got it right. They divided the government so you couldn't overcome it. But I think we all are there. We have to vote, but in the meantime, get to know someone who you disagree with. So in your own neighborhood or your own community, you'll have a friend, whichever way the election goes. There'll be someone who will say, no, Mike's okay. He's not a wingnut. He's not a libtard.
Yeah. That's what's been happening in our building. Our building trust group is 2 or 3 years old now. And even though we don't agree with anything, or I shouldn't say anything, most of what the conservatives are talking about, we like them. I mean, we care about them. We send them cards if they get sick. We've been, one of the members took a terrible fall, and we were worried about her. And still, she's doing great now, but then, that's what happens. They become people, not enemies.
Okay. What a great introduction to my slides. There's only a couple, and there's going to be this little experiential thing. So if you want to grab a pencil and one of those little cards, so you can just make notes to yourself, or you don't have to use my stuff. If you have a pencil, and you can use your own paper. And I'm not going to ask you, I'm just going to ask you to reflect. So we're not going to turn any of this in. This is just, so as you're having a thought, you have something you can say, oh, I want to remember that. Okay, so these are my quick slides. Abraham Lincoln. So much of the Brave Angel stuff is branded around this guy because he came into the presidency at the time when the country is most divided it's ever been, right? And so, next slide. Yeah, so this was the last line of his first inaugural address. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will yet swell the chorus of the union. And again touched, as surely we will be by the better angels of our nature. So this is where we originally, the name of Braver Angels was Better Angels, but there was a foundation that already had that name. So they had to adopt Braver Angels. And yet the organizers realized it takes a lot of courage to try to do this, because you're going to have courage to talk to people who are different than you, who think differently than you. So Braver Angels is probably as good a fit as there's going to be. The other thing you have to remember at this time, which I think is not unusual today, there were brothers who were against brothers. They fought against each other in the war. There were fathers and sons, right? So this, though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. There were people who were family members who wound up fighting for the opposite armies, right? So you think, are we far from that now? Are there family members now that you have that you can't talk to about politics,
Right.
or about religion, or about race? So this is why this period is so fraught. So we just kind of talked about the personal cost of polarization. I don't know if that touched a chord when I said you have a family member, because that's the cost. Next slide. So we talked about polarization intellectually. We're talking about affective polarization. This is that process where you just can't talk to the other person and they become the enemy, right? You notice the shirt colors there. So this is what we believe, is that we have more in common than we think. Now, we have to remember that there's people on the extremes who don't want to compromise, don't want to engage. That's fine. But there's a large group of us, right, who are in the middle. And I hate to use this reference, but it's been used before. Part of the reason that what happened in Germany before World War II happened, because large groups of regular people who didn't have extreme views were quiet and silent and thought, well, that can't happen here. So I think we have to be thoughtful about the times we're in, and we have to participate in trying to build this better society.
We've got a question here. Can you talk about Braver Angels' approach to misinformation and disinformation within a moderated debate? How do you, when someone just says a falsehood?
Mm-hmm. So let me do that in the question and answer.
Mhm.
So I'll put a pin in that now because I want to get through these slides.
Okay.
But there is, and there's also training on how to deal with social media.
Okay.
So
Yeah, we were just having a filler while Jeff was trying to get the slides up again.
mhm. Well, okay, I'll just comment. The moderator, there really isn't a judgment about facts. So there isn't, if there's disinformation, you count on someone else in the debate to say, I don't think that's accurate, and then state what the accurate information is. Not in a confrontive way, but just in a matter of fact way,
Mhm.
because you have those balance and both the audience can ask questions of the presenter through the chairperson, but then also participants can ask questions. So if you ask the question, where is the source of your information on that? Would be a way to deal with disinformation.
Right.
Well, everybody knows. Well, do you have a source?
Right.
Right. Okay, so Braver Angels brings Americans together to bridge the partisan divide for thriving democracy. And your mission is to create a thriving local community that promotes, acts upon the ideals of humanism. Next slide. We learn to engage those we disagree with by looking for common ground. Next slide. And you guys, we welcome people who share our values in learning and growing and enjoying the company of others in a supportive environment. So these just to establish, we already have common ground. You know, these, we're not foreign to one another in our approach and our hopes. Next slide. So this is that group I talked about in 2016, the first group that came together, that's them. The guy with his thumb up in the back is the marriage counselor. The guy next to him is a very conservative professor in New York. And then the guy in the plaid shirt, I'm colorblind, but I think it's blue and white. He's the guy, he was a recruiter. He could talk to anyone. So he got liberals, and it was in Ohio. I'm sorry, that's where they had it. They did it in Ohio. So that was the first group. Next slide. So, like I said, after each workshop and every experience you'll have on Braver Angels, I'll ask you to evaluate. Has your understanding or your attitude changed? And for the last 4 years, when they've been doing the, probably closer to 6 now, they've been doing these after every workshop measuring, we get to 70 to 80% of people who have a better understanding and have increased in a positive attitude toward the other. So the goal is not to change views on issues, which is really important. And we're not looking for compromises, because compromise, you have to give up something. Hold your values. Next slide. It's about, we do change views of each other. So we're not, the other people we disagree with aren't the enemy. We don't use pejorative statements about them. We don't talk about them. We don't make fun of them. We try to engage with them and understand who they are, where they're coming from. Next slide. And by that, we wind up finding more collaborative solutions. We're not, there's a, on the website, there's a trusted elections. After the last election, the leadership ran workshops in 22 states and brought reds and blues together in 22 different states, looking for solutions to trusted elections. So when they ran that, they only would accept solutions that had unanimity, where both the reds and the blues said, yes, I would live with that. That's so people weren't compromising. They weren't trying to find a middle ground. People who said, I can't live with that, that got thrown out. I can't live with that, that got thrown out. So they found, they have a 6 or 8 page document about practical things the governments could do to strengthen the electoral process and gain trust by both conservatives and liberals. So that's the effect of this kind of process. And I didn't bring a copy of that, but
Is that on the website?
it is. It's
Okay.
called Trusted Elections. I
Trusted
believe.
elections.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is your, and this is, we're almost done. This is your little exercise. And there's going to be 6 questions. And so each question, there's going to be never, always, sometimes kind of a response. So this is just a reflective. This is how polarized are you inside yourself, right? So, and this, so now I think you have to imagine the folks that you think of the other, whether they're Republicans, whether they're racists, whether they're poor people, rich people.
The homeless?
Well, you know, and I hate to say this to you guys, but is it the deists?
Oh,
you know,
yeah, people with,
Well, I
yeah,
think you,
that is,
it's the people that when you're watching the television or listening to the radio or driving on the road and something's said and you get so angry and so upset, that's the person you should be thinking about, or the other that you should be thinking about when you answer these questions, to be honest,
Mhm.
right? Otherwise, we're all polite and we're nice. We don't think about those bad things about anyone, right?
yeah.
Well, I think we do inside. And you don't have to share this with anyone. And I'll say, okay, which one of you hate, you know? But there'll be a period at the end, you can say, this is what I learned from this experience. Okay, you ready?
I think
Okay.
so.
Keep your eyes open.
Mhm.
So how often do I find myself thinking about those people on the other political side without much regard for the variation among them? Next slide.
And the count would be always,
Here it is.
okay,
Often,
okay,
sometimes, or never. So each time they'll have that same
okay.
often, sometimes, or never. How often do I find myself assigning mainly self-serving or negative motives to the other side to the other group, mainly positive motives to my group. Again, next slide. Often, sometimes, or never. How often do I find myself focusing on the most extreme or outrageous ideas and people on the other side, thereby making it hard to see how a reasonable person could remain in that group? Next slide. Often, sometimes, or never. Okay, next slide. How often do I find myself comparing the worst people on the other side with the best people on my side? Next slide. Often, sometimes, or never. Kind of surprising. Next slide. Next, yeah. How often do I feel a rush of pleasure with friends when we ridicule those crazies on the other side? Really, this is the problem of when you're having coffee or you're really enjoying yourself and someone says, you know what he said this month? You know what he did at the rally? Oh my God, and oh, those people are so nuts. This is it, okay? This is how that perpetuates, right? Now, if that was, I think, if that was a racist remark, we wouldn't be joyful about it, right? We wouldn't be going, oh yeah. We would probably be holding each other accountable for, that sounds kind of racist, you know. We're in politics, oftentimes we allow ourselves to slide into this denigrating, pejorative kind of, because it's fun, right? It's the norm. And we get to, you know, be outrageous about them. Well, it's no different than race. They're human beings. Now, this is number 6. It's a little different. Go ahead. Which of the following is closest to my overall emotional attitude towards the majority of the people who support the other side? Hate, they are enemies, out to destroy the country. Disdain, they are ignorant and should know better. Pity, they are well-meaning but duped. Basic respect, they make contributions even if they're mostly off base. Respect and appreciation, they make unique and necessary contributions. Just a moment to reflect. So what did you learn about yourself when it comes to polarizing attitude towards the other political others? Next slide. I'm supposed to give you 48 minutes, which we don't need. And then what I would do normally is I would match you up one-on-one, and you would talk to one another about what you found out about this. We're not going to do that, but in a mini workshop, you would sit, we just pair you up to people next to you, and you would disclose to each other personally, what did I find out about myself? How did I react? Because this is the second part, the most important part of Braver Angels activities. What was my experience? And then how did I share it with someone? How do I disclose my own limits or my own fears or my own recognition about how I was contributing to the problem? That's pretty essential. Otherwise, it stays very intellectual, you know. Well, once you recognize some of these behaviors in yourself, you then want to get rid of them, or at least modify them. Maybe you don't get rid of them completely. Get involved with braverangels.org events, attend an event, become a member or a volunteer. Membership dues are $12 a year. So it's $1 a month, very expensive. And it's really quite an organization. Next slide. That's me. I have cards up there. So I'm, you know, if you think, you know, I wish I would have asked Mike this or that, that's my Braver Angels email address. And I've got cards on the piano, so you don't have to memorize it. And then that's my cell phone. That's just another one of those quotes: with malice toward none and charity for all, with firmness in the right. Again, our hero. Next slide. I don't like that man. I must get to know him. You know, Abraham Lincoln surrounded himself with people who disagreed with him. His cabinet was like a war cabinet where they didn't like each other and they didn't like him. But that was his style of how to govern this country that he was left with, is to surround himself with people that he disagreed with, and he had to listen to all of them. So I'm sure their cabinet meetings were not much fun. Last slide, that might be it. It is.
Yeah.
So let me say one other thing
Yeah.
before you do that. So I do have sheets of statistics if people are interested in them. I know many people are saying, oh, they just maybe, cloud over, but you can, anyone who'd like those, and they're also all online. Nothing in Braver Angels is membership only. So you can, yeah, I think there's two there. So, and this, rather than me reading you numbers, you can look at these and analyze them. Yeah, okay. And I can answer questions about those later. The other thing I've got here is that local, you can't see it on Zoom, local community debate, Oregon's rural urban divide. I'm going to leave.
And when's
these.
that going to be?
It's June 12th.
June 12th.
7 to 9 p.m. Pacific time. Because you also have to remember.
Is it going to be over Zoom or is it going to be on, in person?
Zoom.
It's going to be Zoom.
Yeah.
But it's a local debate.
Yes, it's
Wow.
it's hosted by the Northwest Willamette Valley Braver Angels Alliance.
Good for them.
Now, I know there's a fellow in Eastern Oregon, maybe Grant County or Wheeler, not sure which. He wants to have one of these in every state. Oh, sorry, every county.
Every county.
Because he said this is such a pressing issue. I mean, we're talking about secession, right? It's no different than Texas saying they want to be their own state.
Right.
To have a bunch of Oregon counties saying it's so intolerable here, they want to leave.
Right.
That's serious. So I'll put these out on the table. So those who want to follow up on that. And then I've got 2 newsletters. This is a typical newsletter for Braver Angels. I've got 2 for different, I think it's every 2 weeks, and you don't have to be a member. You can just sign up for these. And they have a variety of, they have just the workshops, they have specialty groups, like they have a mental health group for how to deal with polarization for mental health professionals. They have a film club, and they now have a bunch of alliances with other organizations.
Yes.
They're doing campus debates with Academy of Trustees, I think, and then they have one at high school level. It's called Bridges to Civility, I think. So they also know that they can't do this by themselves. So their strategy now is to find as many other like organizations. Common Cause is another one. So the website's overwhelming, but it's worth the trip.
Right.
So questions?
I have a question here from Amanda. She's on Zoom. Amanda, can you come in and ask your question, please? Here she is. Hi.
And so glad to see you.
Hi, actually, you already asked my question, Helen, about the mis and disinformation. But what I can offer a comment here, which is one of the things that I do applaud about Braver Angels as a communication expert is that it really teaches fundamental communication skills, right? And helps people practice those. So everything from false attributions to listening. And I think that's really tremendous. I think there are many models for engaging difficult conversations and practices. And this is a great one, as you've experienced directly, Helen.
Right. I have, well, and Amanda brought a wonderful speaker, Steiner Brin, to our programs a few years ago. And he was, for world peace, he feels like you've got to get people in the same room. You don't have the Americans talking for the Israelis and the Russians talking for Gaza. They have the wrong people here, but you get the Israelis and the Gazans or the Palestinians in the same room. And
yeah, and Steiner's dialogue is his model is there's a couple of differences, I think, that are really critical. One is he believes in confrontational dialogue. So there aren't rules. There aren't rules of engagement going in. He has a process, but it's not directly divulged, right, to the participants. Another is that he works with those same groups for years. And then the third difference is that or maybe not a difference, but he specifically looks at first line people, municipal leaders, police, people who are at, people who are really on the front lines of leadership. And for example, he really supports things like Bill Burns's book, sentiments in his book, Back Channel, right? We have to be able to talk to each other at these high levels. So,
Okay, yeah, I was going to comment that in the Clackamas County Alliance, in our efforts to recruit conservatives, there is the same discussion right now, and there's another model of communication that allows for greater conflict and confrontation under controlled environment. But there is a question about whether liberals are too polite, and that they're so polite that they avoid the serious topics.
Yeah, we
right?
avoid
So I think that, at least for in Clackamas County, we're bringing that up from the grassroots to the association, and we're looking at some of the models. So
Thank you.
great question.
Thank you. All right, we've got some questions here. Number one, okay, go for it. Okay, we have a number one.
I think this is one.
Okay, Marty, you're first.
Yeah, I guess I don't need the microphone. I just wanted to say that I think you have very positive and valuable thing going on here, but it's a long, slow approach that will work over time. But right now, we have only a very few months until a vitally important election that will affect our country for a long time to come. And I think our effort needs to go to making sure that Donald Trump does not get anywhere near the White House. That is.
Marty, ask your question.
It is not a question.
Okay.
It is a statement that my time and effort goes to the most important thing of the next few months.
Okay.
I do want to say that, there's a level of hysteria about this
It's not
election.
hysteria, it's
Well,
true.
well, it is your truth.
It is true.
Okay, now wait a minute, just let him speak. Let Mike speak.
Let me speak.
Okay.
I'm not denying what you said. That is your view of the world right now, and it is your reality. Half of America thinks differently. We live in one country, unless we're saying it is time to divide the country. And we want two presidents.
But I said, what you're doing is wonderful,
Sure.
but it's a long, slow approach to a good end.
I'll give you one point. If I have influenced you and you influence one other person, and I influence you and you influence one other person, how does change occur?
Long and slow.
It's heart to heart initially. Okay. So I think I have to keep doing what I'm doing because I have to have hope. And I think regardless of who's elected president, the country is going to remain extraordinarily divided. That won't resolve. The last election didn't resolve the tensions, right? We have the risk of authoritarianism that is now deep in our DNA. And if we can't remove it thoughtfully, then that will continue. So I don't disagree with you, but there's got to be a strategy. And as we burn down the barn and start over.
Doing what you're doing,
Right.
It's good, it's valuable.
Right. And we all need to vote.
Yeah.
Next question.
Okay, then question number two.
As a person of color in an organization that I think I'm the only one, how has Braver Angels done on that as far as membership association? Because we're getting towards half the country.
Right. So, I can't answer that question because I don't know statistically. I know it's an aspiration. I know it's a constant conversation of engagement. I have to say that the other challenge for Braver Angels right now is if you look around the room, it attracts people who are retired, who are older, and have time. we're not doing so well with younger people. Now we're doing these high school and college debates because that's quick, it's, you know, and it's civil and it's modeling behavior. But most young people, I think, would find this tedious, and people who are working 2 jobs aren't going to have the time. So I think that's a challenge we have to overcome. I don't know that Braver Angels will do it, but I think it will align with other people who are in that space. So
One of the national leaders is I can't think of his last name, his first name, I believe, is John, is a person of color, he's black.
yeah,
And he's sharp.
He's a spokesperson.
Spokesperson.
Yeah, in fact, led the conversation about the debate about colorblindness. And he was in speaking for it, which really people flipped out. But yeah, I'll look up his name. But the other, also Gutierrez is the, Monica is the podcast kind of chair. She's from Seattle. So,
Otherwise, this is, you know, I'm looking at this as just another white organization.
well, and it's our risk, right? It's like it's another white liberal organization, only of seniors.
Okay, questioner number
It
3.
has helped me recruit some people of color.
Okay, question is, I see 18 bullet points on your rules of engagement.
Right.
And you said that you have to agree to the rules or else you get told to shut up and you read it. How is this not an authoritarian model?
Well, because I think if you look at the rules, they are really overlapping. There's probably 3 big rules there and all that. These are explanations of what this rule means. These are behaviors that would be, are you aware that you're conducting yourself in this way? My experience with workshops is that they're structured. So either you like the structure or you don't. So you're not going to sign up for one. The debates have a certain structure, and you're going to either tolerate it or not. But people aren't walking around with that sheet. I think I did that so that you guys could reflect on, do these make sense or not? Are these offensive? Are these things you do? Really is a question, right? That's why I wanted to do it in this format, rather than me preaching at you and saying, you're all bad people, you do these things. These are pretty common behaviors. So I don't, the good news about Braver Angels, it's structure, but it's grassroots. So it's really like herding cats. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. Our alliance has great freedom. So the thing we have to do now is recruit conservatives. So we're scrambling for what are the rules about how to do that.
Okay, so you're herding cats, but you're only herding cats that want to be herded?
Correct.
You're not herding the cats who say there are no rules in the 9th.
Correct. So now, but our state spokesperson, Demetra, her objective after I went to the Republican Central Committee and participated in their listening to hopeful candidates, she said she wanted to engage with the Proud Boys. So if you make a start, this isn't, I think one of the beauties of grassroots organizations is that they're really as good as the people who are in it at that place, right? And so that's what you've got here is what we've got. But we're all engaging in people who are different than us and trying to say, we suggest you do the same. Try to get outside your bubble, even if it's just to listen to a different radio station. I was teaching management at School of Social Work. I know I made some of the students cry because I required, this was, you guys will all remember this time, Limbaugh.
Rush Limbaugh.
Rush, feminazis. But I required them to listen to one station where he would be on and listen to his broadcast, and they flipped out. I said, half of the people homes you're going to be going into doing child protective services are going to be listening to him and believe what he says. So if you're totally unaware of their point of view, how are you going to help them? How are you going to engage with them? How are you going to talk about their kids? You'll be an alien. So we have to create that space for us to be uncomfortable. I'm up.
Yes,
Am I a frog?
yes, we have, thank you. That space to feel uncomfortable, that's really tough, but important.
I think that's the work.
Yeah, we have a question from Hank Robb. Hank, come on in. He's on Zoom.
Yes, you suggested that half the people have a different idea, and I think you're right. What do you do? What convinces you that their idea is not that authoritarianism is better?
Oh, it might be, you know, so all I can tell you is that I did a workshop in Woodburn, a face-to-face one, pardon?
Authoritarian is better than you said it might be.
To them, I mean, their point of view is we don't get anything done in this country. We spend all of our time deliberating. If you have a strong man that can take action, I mean, look at China and look at Russia. Those people somehow, whether they say that they can't make a choice, they could leave the country, you know. Chinese can flee, but I think there's why do authoritarians, you have to ask yourself the question, why do authoritarians come into power? Why do many democracies turn into fascist states? Why is that? There's a reason. If we don't address it, then we're blind to it. So and we'll learn from those people who believe that authoritarian government is superior if we talk to them. You understand, how can you believe that, right? What are you going to give up? And they're going to say, I would bet, folks that I've talked to have said, I don't have freedom. The elites are running things. I am not free. I don't get to have a gun. I don't get to talk about my religion. I don't get to have a decent job. I have to work 2 jobs. Things can be better. I want someone who takes my point of view and makes it happen. I'm in Woodburn. It's one of these nice workshops run by a Unitarian church. And I think all the people are Unitarian liberals, you know, and I'm just trying to get an experience. We're supposed to pair up. There's only 6 of us. I look across the room and see this one guy that I think I would get off with, you know, he'd be good. He looked Native American. I thought, well, that'd be interesting. Well, he was very conservative. He believed in militias. And the exercise that we had to go through was asking these questions in this, you know, he had an AK-47 that he finally sold and just got a pistol. But he believed that the risk of an authoritarian government that would control at the local level was very real to him. So he wanted he and his neighbors to be able to fight that kind of an oppression. So he had a very practical application. We talked about immigration. He was close the border, you can't jump ahead, you know, illegals shouldn't be here. I disclosed that I'm a 2nd generation immigrant. Both my grandparents, one came from Germany, one came from Poland. I don't think they came legally. They came in steerage in some boats, you know, and they were in Ellis Island. They got hosed off for lice. Yeah. So, and then he disclosed after this rant about illegal immigration that his parents, one was Portuguese, the other one was Spanish. They snuck into Hawaii because they could pass for Hawaiians. So he wasn't a Native American, he was a Portuguese, Spanish mix. And then they snuck to the mainland because they could pass for Hawaiians. So he had disclosed his own illegal entry into this country because it was the greatest country. Well, he had to reflect. After he told the story, he does it. It sounds kind of hypocritical, doesn't it? So we left really close friends, even though we had these mile apart perspectives. So that's the power of engaging with someone that's different than you in an honest and relatively controlled way. We both kind of came there thinking, well, I don't know what this is going to be. Well, we both walked out. I have a different perspective of militias. This, being a Braver Angels, forced me to buy a Constitution, a Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. I was raised Catholic. We didn't get any of that, you know? So I'm reading these things and I'm thinking, because I'm going to get confronted by conservatives because they don't like rapid change. They want to go back to the basics. They want slow change over time, right? So they're going to go back to these core documents. And if I can't speak about the Second Amendment intelligently, if I can't speak about how the electoral process is supposed to happen intelligently, I mean, I have to be an expert. I have at least have read those core documents. You know, the second thing is I was getting only certain types of magazines. So I signed up for the National Review, William Buckley's publication, you know, very intelligent, very clearly written, challenging my opinions about a number of things in a very thoughtful and intellectual way. So now my wife has become a conservative and she's going to divorce me. It happened.
I'm off.
Great thought, because I find my media
Yeah.
and I can't listen to the other. And so what's hard is to find that media that's going to be helping me inform me better, and that I'm not going to be offended so much I can't listen
Right.
to it.
So I would, the Economist was referenced here. I think The Economist is a really good magazine. It's done in Europe, I mean, in England, you know, but it's more intellectual because it's more about the economy, but it's also deals with America and, you know, I think it's more balanced. It's just a well-rounded, yeah, and it's pretty frank about some of the things that are happening in America. I don't think they don't soft pedal some of our problems.
We'll take 4, let's get to question 5.
Do anymore.
I think you'll have to find those, and it'd be good to go to the website, to Braver Angels, because they will direct you. I now have an email feed, or I mean a news feed called, I got it from Braver Angels. It's Flipside, and it takes an issue and goes through both sides, and then references the article that you can go read for the extreme of either side. But it lays out these two kind of in comparison. I think it's called Flipside.
But it's on the website.
Yeah, the Braver Angels, I think, will help you find information sources that are more balanced and or more radical. You know, where you'll be able to, of course, you can find them. The radical ones probably are pretty common.
Well, that's kind of my question is, first off, how many conservatives do you have in the Better Angels, and how do you get them there?
Well, I think the national challenge for Braver Angels is conservatives. The goal is to be at 60-40 is the limit. And we're about there. Only about 40% of Braver Angels right now is conservative, and it's a Braver Angels crisis. I mean, we're doing, you know, interviews nationwide. What drives conservatives away from Braver Angels? And part of it is the politeness, so much structure that the passion isn't there. Where's the action? What are we going to do about the election?
They're fake conservatives.
No, I think that there's serious, genuine conservatives that say that some of the practices and some of the people that are, particularly our avoidance of conflict, is they show up to 1 or 2 meetings, you guys just want to talk to each other. You don't really. We did a presentation in St. James Catholic Parish in Malala, and the parishioners there came. They were all very polite and all very nice. Because actually, there was a former priest that kind of invited us. He's a Braver Angel, but this one fella thought he was just gonna, you know, have a seizure, and I said, you know, you seem like you have something you want to say. He said, oh, I'll just make a mess. He said, you people don't want to hear what I have to say. He said, I have very passionate opinions, but we said, that's exactly what we want to hear. You know, as we engaged him and the Braver Angels that were in the room, and there was 4 of us because we were trying to practice and listen. And because we used some of these techniques of really listening and asking the next question, asking him to explain why he felt so passionately about it, he is very vulnerable. And he said, I've never been that open in a group ever. And so now he's joining us and he's bringing his wife. Because he said, there's something here that I want to know more about because I've never felt like that ever. He said, even in this church, he said, I'm kind of over on that edge here, you know. Mhm. Far right in the Catholic Church in Malala. You know, that's pretty far right.
Okay, let's see, there's 5. We got time for, we got 1 minute question, I know, and then Todd, and then we're gonna, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's a long article in today's New York Times about how surprisingly bipartisan Congress has been. We just tend not to be aware of that. But I suggest everybody, we get the printed edition on Sunday. Anyway, it's a fascinating article, and it's something we're not aware of because the news emphasizes the extreme.
Right.
But actually, Congress says those are the parts of what got a lot done during the Biden administration. So, and sort of related to that, my approach would be to try to get down into the detail rather than general, and say, rather than you think Congress is doing good or bad? No. Talk about a particular bill or two particular bills. Say, are you in favor of that legislation? If not, get down into the detail.
So in these workshops, they'll have these divisive issues. They'll actually have script because they've just taken what people have said about it. And sometimes you have to play the conservative. You have to say things that you don't believe, but it's on very narrow topics that are very divisive, or not so divisive. Like I think, right? What good things did Congress do?